The gentle buzz of an alarm clock broke the morning silence at exactly 5:30 a.m. Marcus Richardson's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light filtering through his bedroom curtains. At 45 years old, he had maintained this early morning routine for the past 20 years, even before becoming the governor's chief of staff. Marcus sat up in his king-size bed and looked around his modestly decorated bedroom. Despite his high-ranking position, he preferred simplicity, clean lines, minimal furniture, and a few family photos on the walls. His late mother's picture sat on the nightstand, her warm smile still giving him strength every morning. Another day to make a difference, Marcus whispered to himself, a habit he developed during his early days in public service. He stretched his tall frame and headed to the bathroom, his movements precise and purposeful. The morning routine was more than just preparation. It was his time to center himself for the challenges ahead. In the bathroom mirror, Marcus adjusted his perfectly trimmed salt and pepper beard. His dark brown eyes, sharp and alert, looked back at him with determination. He had earned every gray hair in his beard through years of hard work, climbing from a junior policy analyst to becoming the most trusted advisor to Governor Sarah Mitchell. After a quick shower, Marcus pulled out his suit for the day, a charcoal gray Tom Ford, custom-fitted to his athletic build. He had learned early in his career that appearance mattered in politics, especially for a black man in high-ranking positions. The suit was his armor, and he wore it with dignity. While getting dressed, Marcus thought about the day ahead. The education reform meeting at 9:00 a.m. would be crucial. The state needed to address the funding gaps between rich and poor school districts, something he had experienced firsthand growing up in the city's underfunded South Side. In his spacious kitchen, Marcus prepared his breakfast: whole grain toast, scrambled egg whites, and a bowl of fresh fruit. His house, located in a historic neighborhood just 2 miles from the state capitol, was quiet except for the morning news playing softly on the kitchen TV. He had bought this house 5 years ago, not because it was the biggest he could afford, but because it reminded him of the home he grew up in, warm, welcoming, and full of character. As he ate, Marcus scrolled through the morning's news on his iPad. 3 urgent emails from the governor's office popped up, but they could wait until he reached work. These morning moments were sacred, a practice his father, a former high school principal, had taught him about starting each day with clarity and purpose. At 6:45 a.m., Marcus gathered his things: a sleek black briefcase containing his laptop, a folder with the education reform proposals, and his state-issued phone. He could have easily called for the official car service that came with his position, but Marcus preferred to walk to work when weather permitted. These walks kept him grounded, allowing him to see the city wake up and remind himself who he really served: the people. Before leaving, Marcus stood in front of the mirror in his entryway, straightening his burgundy tie. His mother's voice echoed in his memory: "Stand tall, baby. You carry our hopes with you." He smiled, remembering how she had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, setting him on this path. The morning air was crisp as Marcus stepped out onto his porch. His neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was already out watering her prized roses. She waved warmly, as she did every morning. To her, he wasn't the governor's chief of staff. He was just Marcus, the kind man who helped her carry groceries and cleared her sidewalk after snowstorms. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Marcus?" Mrs. Thompson called out. "Sure is, Mrs. Thompson," he replied with a genuine smile. "Those roses are looking spectacular." As Marcus began his walk, his polished black Oxford shoes clicking against the sidewalk, he felt ready for whatever the day might bring. 20 years in public service had taught him that every day brought its own challenges and surprises. But today, even he couldn't have predicted how a simple walk to work would turn into a moment that would spark a statewide conversation about race, power, and prejudice. Little did Marcus know, as he walked through the tree-lined streets of his neighborhood, that in less than 30 minutes, his position, his dignity, and his composure would all be tested in ways he never expected. Officer James Cooper sat in his patrol car, sipping his 3rd coffee of the morning. At 32 years old, he had been with the police force for 8 years, spending most of his time patrolling this wealthy neighborhood near the state capitol. The area rarely saw any real crime, mostly just noise complaints and parking violations. The spring morning was quiet, almost too quiet for Cooper's liking. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his blue eyes scanning the streets out of habit. The neighborhood's perfectly manicured lawns and expensive homes always made him feel slightly out of place, reminding him of the stark difference between this area and the working-class neighborhood where he grew up. As Cooper turned onto Maple Avenue, he noticed a tall black man walking confidently down the street. The man wore an expensive-looking suit and carried a leather briefcase, but something about his presence in this predominantly white neighborhood triggered Cooper's suspicions he would later be forced to examine. Not the usual type we see around here, Cooper muttered to himself, already reaching for his car's gear shift. He had developed what he called instincts over his years on the force, though these instincts often aligned more with his prejudices than actual suspicious behavior. Cooper pulled his patrol car alongside Marcus, deliberately driving slowly to match his walking pace. Through his open window, he watched as Marcus continued walking, seemingly unbothered by the police presence. This somehow irritated Cooper even more. In his experience, people usually showed some reaction when a police car followed them. Marcus was well aware of the patrol car trailing him. He had experienced this kind of attention before, many times throughout his life. His heart rate increased slightly, not from fear but from a familiar wariness. Even in his perfectly tailored suit, even with his advanced degrees and prestigious position, some things hadn't changed. Cooper finally pulled his car ahead of Marcus and stopped, angling it to partially block the sidewalk. He stepped out, adjusting his belt with an exaggerated movement that made his badge catch the morning light. The smell of coffee and leather from his car mixed with the crisp morning air. "Good morning, sir," Cooper said, his tone carrying an edge of mockery that didn't match his professional words. "Lovely morning for a walk, isn't it?" Marcus stopped, maintaining a calm expression that he had perfected over years of similar encounters. "Yes, it is," he replied evenly, his deep voice steady and controlled. "Mind telling me what brings you to this neighborhood?" Cooper asked, his hand resting casually on his belt near his badge. "We don't usually see many visitors walking around here this early." A few early morning joggers slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold. Across the street, a woman walking her dog had stopped completely, her phone partially raised. Marcus noticed all of this from his peripheral vision, but kept his eyes focused on Officer Cooper. "I live a few blocks from here," Marcus stated simply, knowing from experience that offering too much information too quickly often made situations like this worse. Cooper's eyebrows raised in obvious disbelief. "Oh, do you now?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, then you wouldn't mind showing me some identification, would you? Just to make sure everything's in order." The way Cooper emphasized in order made it clear what he really meant. He didn't believe Marcus belonged in this neighborhood. By now, more people had gathered at a distance. The woman with the dog was definitely recording with her phone now, and a man had stepped out onto his porch to watch. Marcus could feel his jaw tightening, but his voice remained steady. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" he asked, his hand not moving toward his wallet yet. "I'm simply walking to work, as I do every morning." Cooper's face hardened at the question. "Sir, when an officer asks for identification, it's in your best interest to comply immediately. Unless, of course, you have something to hide." The tension in the air grew thicker. A car slowed as it passed, the driver clearly trying to see what was happening. Marcus stood perfectly still, his mind running through years of similar experiences, years of having to prove he belonged in spaces others thought he didn't. Little did Officer Cooper know, his next actions would not only change both their lives but would spark a conversation that would echo through the halls of power in their state capital. The body camera on his uniform recorded everything, creating a record of what would soon become a viral moment in their city's history. The morning sun cast long shadows on the sidewalk as Marcus and Officer Cooper faced each other. A small crowd had gathered, their presence adding to the growing tension in the air. Traffic slowed as passing cars rubbernecked at the scene, some drivers openly staring at the confrontation between the suited black man and the white police officer. "Officer," Marcus said calmly, his hands visible at his sides, "I understand you're doing your job, but I'd like to know the specific reason for this stop." His voice carried the weight of authority, something that seemed to irritate Officer Cooper even more. Cooper stepped closer, his boots scraping against the concrete. "Listen here," he said, his voice carrying that special kind of mockery reserved for when he thought someone was being difficult. "This is a nice neighborhood. We keep it safe by checking on unusual activity." A woman in running clothes had stopped nearby, her phone clearly recording the interaction. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Two more people joined her, their phones also raised. Marcus noticed all of this but kept his attention focused on the officer in front of him. Unusual activity. Marcus repeated, his eyebrow raising slightly. You mean walking to work in a suit is unusual activity? His tone remained professional, but there was an edge to it now, the edge of a man who had dealt with this situation far too many times before. Cooper's face reddened slightly. Sir, your attitude isn't helping the situation. ID. Now, he emphasized each word, his right hand still resting near his badge, a gesture meant to remind Marcus of his authority. The morning breeze carried the sound of more cars stopping, more footsteps approaching. The audience had grown to about 15 people now, a mix of morning joggers, dog walkers, and residents who had stepped out of their homes to watch. Marcus took a slow, deliberate breath. Officer Cooper, he said, reading the name tag on the officer's uniform, I'd like to speak to your supervisor. His voice was firm but controlled, the voice he used in governor's meetings when handling difficult situations. This request seemed to throw Cooper off balance for a moment. Most people he stopped didn't ask for supervisors. They usually just complied or got angry. This calm confidence was something different. My supervisor. Cooper let out a short, dismissive laugh. Look, buddy, you can either show me your ID right now, or we can discuss this down at the station. Your choice, the crowd murmured. Someone whispered, Is that who I think it is? Another voice responded, Isn't he the one from the news? Marcus maintained eye contact with Cooper as he slowly reached for his wallet. Officer Cooper, I want to be very clear about something, he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet street. What's happening right now is exactly why we need police reform in this state. Cooper scoffed. Oh, here we go with the reform talk. Just show me your ID, sir. The last word dripped with sarcasm. Marcus took out his wallet and removed his state government ID. He held it up but didn't immediately hand it over. Before I show you this, I want you to think carefully about why you stopped me. What made me unusual enough to warrant this attention? The crowd had grown larger still. A news van had pulled up at the end of the street. Someone must have called the local station. Cooper's face showed the first signs of uncertainty as he noticed the growing audience. Just hand over the ID, Cooper demanded, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Marcus finally held out the ID card, watching as Cooper snatched it from his hand. The officer's eyes scanned the card once, then again. His face went through a series of rapid changes. Confusion, disbelief, and then something close to fear. The state government ID clearly showed Marcus's photo next to his title, Marcus Richardson, Chief of Staff to Governor Sarah Mitchell. A collective gasp went through the crowd as someone said loudly enough for everyone to hear, That's the governor's chief of staff. He's the one who wrote the new education bill. Officer Cooper stood frozen, the ID card trembling slightly in his hand. His face had gone from red to pale in seconds. The body camera on his chest continued to record everything, capturing what would soon become one of the most talked-about incidents in the state's recent history. Officer Cooper's hands trembled slightly as he held Marcus's government ID. The morning sun seemed to deliberately highlight the gold state seal and the words Office of the Governor printed across the top. The crowd around them had grown even larger, and the quiet whispers had turned into open conversations. Is there a problem, Officer Cooper? Marcus asked, his voice carrying just enough authority to make several onlookers pull out their phones to record. The tables had turned, but Marcus showed no sign of triumph or satisfaction on his face. Cooper swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly above his tight collar. The confidence and mockery that had filled his voice just moments ago had evaporated like morning dew. His mind raced through all the things he had said and done in the last few minutes, each word and gesture now playing back like a horror movie in his head. No, sir, Cooper stammered, thrusting the ID back toward Marcus with shaking fingers. No problem at all. I apologize for the inconvenience. His face had turned a shade of red that spread down his neck and disappeared into his uniform. A local news reporter had pushed through the crowd, her cameraman following close behind. Mr. Richardson, she called out. Diana Chen from Channel 8 News. Would you care to comment on what just happened here? Marcus raised his hand politely to acknowledge the reporter, but kept his attention focused on Officer Cooper. "Officer," he said calmly, "I think we both know what happened here today." His words carried no anger, which somehow made them even more powerful. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people now. Phones recorded from every angle, capturing Cooper's visible discomfort and Marcus's dignified composure. Someone in the crowd said loudly, "That's the man who wrote the new education bill. He lives just 3 blocks away." Cooper's eyes darted around, suddenly aware of just how many people were watching. His body camera's red light blinked steadily, recording everything. The same technology he had often used to protect himself now felt like it was burning a hole in his chest. "Sir, I was just following standard procedure," Cooper began, but his voice trailed off as he realized how hollow those words sounded. "Standard procedure?" Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Let's talk about that procedure, Officer Cooper. Would you have followed the same procedure if I had been white?" The question hung in the air like heavy smoke. More reporters had arrived. Camera flashes started popping from different directions. Cooper looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. That's not. I mean," Cooper stuttered, his usual authority completely dismantled. Marcus checked his watch. "It was 7:45 a.m. I have a meeting with the governor at 9:00 a.m., he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We'll be discussing police reform, actually. I think what happened here this morning might make an interesting addition to our agenda." The crowd murmured in approval. Several people were already posting videos online. A young woman in the crowd shouted, "I got it all on video, Mr. Richardson. Every single word." Cooper stood rooted to the spot, his face a mixture of embarrassment and fear. His supervisor would see this. The chief would see this. The governor would see this. His career flashed before his eyes. "Officer Cooper," Marcus said, straightening his tie, "I suggest you take some time today to think about why you really stopped me. Think about what you saw that made you suspicious. Was it my skin color? My presence in this neighborhood? Or was it something else?" More camera flashes. More phones recording. More whispers in the crowd. "I'm sorry, sir," Cooper managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the apology, but not accepting it outright. "I hope this becomes a learning moment, officer, not just for you, but for the entire department." He turned to address the gathered media. "I will be making a statement later today from the governor's office. For now, I need to prepare for my meeting." As Marcus began walking away, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, many people nodding respectfully as he passed. The reporters followed, shoving questions about police reform and racial profiling. Officer Cooper remained standing on the sidewalk, still holding his position but stripped of all authority. His radio crackled to life. Dispatch was calling him. News traveled fast, and his supervisor was already requesting his immediate return to the station. The morning sun continued to shine, indifferent to the career-altering moment it had just illuminated. By the time Marcus reached the state capitol building, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The videos of his encounter with Officer Cooper had already gone viral on social media. Security guards at the entrance nodded to him with extra respect, their eyes showing they had already seen the footage. Marcus walked through the marble halls of the Capitol, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Staff members stopped their conversations as he passed, some offering supportive smiles, others quickly looking at their phones and then back at him. The morning's incident had spread through the building like wildfire. Sarah Mitchell, the governor, was waiting in her office when Marcus arrived. Her usually neat desk was covered with printouts of social media posts and news reports. The TV on her wall was showing footage of the incident, captured from multiple angles by the gathered crowd. "Marcus," she said, standing up as he entered. Her face showed a mix of concern and anger. "I've seen the videos. All of them." The governor was a tall woman in her 50s, known for her direct approach to problems. Right now, her blue eyes burned with controlled fury. Marcus placed his briefcase on a chair and loosened his tie slightly. "Sarah, I was going to tell you about it after our education meeting." "The education meeting can wait," she said firmly. "This is bigger. That officer, Cooper, his behavior was completely unacceptable." She pointed to her computer screen, where one of the viral videos was playing. "The way he spoke to you, the look on his face when he saw your ID." Marcus sat down in one of the leather chairs facing her desk. "It's not the first time something like this has happened," he said quietly. "Just the first time it was caught on camera." The governor's assistant knocked and entered quickly. "Ma'am, the police chief is here, and the press room is packed with reporters. They're all asking for a statement." Governor Mitchell nodded. "Tell the chief to wait, and tell the press we'll have a statement within the hour." After the assistant left, she turned back to Marcus. "The police chief wants to apologize personally. They're already talking about suspending Cooper." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Maybe we can use this for something more than just punishing one officer," he said thoughtfully. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his sister showing his nieces holding up signs that read, "Uncle Marcus stands strong." The governor raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking? Instead of just suspending Cooper, what if we use this incident to push through the police reform bill we've been working on?" Marcus pulled out his laptop, the one that's been stuck in committee for months. "Public attention right now could help us get the votes we need." Governor Mitchell smiled slowly, remembering why she had hired Marcus as her chief of staff 3 years ago. He always saw the bigger picture. A news alert flashed on the TV screen. The video had reached national news networks. The caption read, "Governor's chief of staff racially profiled by local police officer, caught on camera." "Your mother would be proud," the governor said softly, knowing how much Marcus's late mother had influenced his career in public service. She raised a man who can turn discrimination into positive change. Marcus felt his throat tighten at the mention of his mother. She had always told him to be better than those who tried to put him down. Now he had a chance to prove it. The phone on the governor's desk buzzed. "The police chief is getting impatient," her assistant's voice came through the speaker. "And CNN is calling." Governor Mitchell looked at Marcus. "What do you want to do? This is your experience, your story. We'll handle it however you want." Marcus stood up and straightened his tie. Through the office window, he could see news vans gathering outside the Capitol building. His phone showed missed calls from civil rights leaders, political allies, and even the state senators. "Let's talk to the police chief," he said firmly. "But first, I need to write a statement. One that focuses not on anger or punishment, but on change and improvement." He turned to the governor. "It's time to show everyone that real leadership isn't about getting even, it's about getting better." The governor nodded, pride evident in her eyes. As Marcus began drafting his statement, more news alerts flashed across the TV screen. The morning's unfortunate incident was about to become a catalyst for real change in their state's history. The governor's conference room buzzed with tension as Police Chief William Hendricks stood before Marcus and Governor Mitchell. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating the strain on everyone's faces. News vans could still be seen parked outside the Capitol building. "Mr. Richardson," Chief Hendricks began, his gray mustache twitching nervously, "on behalf of the entire police department, I want to express our deepest apologies for Officer Cooper's behavior." Marcus sat calmly at the long wooden table, his hands folded in front of him. The morning's viral videos played silently on a screen behind them, showing the confrontation from different angles. Each replay made Chief Hendricks wince. "Chief," Marcus responded, his voice steady, "I didn't ask for this meeting to receive apologies. I want to talk about real changes." He opened his laptop and turned it toward the chief. "This is the police reform bill that's been sitting in committee for 6 months." Governor Mitchell leaned forward in her chair. "We're turning this morning's incident into an opportunity, Chief Hendricks, and we need your help to do it." The chief's face showed surprise. He had expected demands for Officer Cooper's badge, not an invitation to collaborate on reform. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked, pulling his reading glasses from his uniform pocket. Marcus stood and walked to the whiteboard. With quick, precise movements, he began writing. "Mandatory bias training for all officers, community engagement programs, review of stop and search procedures, body camera footage review system, civilian oversight committee." "These aren't punishments, Chief," Marcus explained, capping the marker. "These are investments in better policing, better relationships with the community, better protection for both citizens and officers." Outside the conference room, phones kept ringing. News stations from across the country wanted statements. Civil rights leaders were calling for protests, but inside this room, something different was happening. Chief Hendricks studied the list, then looked at the videos still playing silently on the screen. Officer Cooper, he said quietly, is not a bad cop. But his actions today, he shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. That's exactly the point, Marcus said. This isn't about one bad cop. It's about a system that needs improvement. Officer Cooper didn't wake up this morning planning to discriminate, but his unconscious biases led him to see a threat where there was none. Governor Mitchell stood and joined Marcus at the whiteboard. We're not looking to punish the entire police force, Chief. We want to help them do their jobs better, to serve and protect everyone equally. The chief removed his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes. 25 years in law enforcement had taught him when change was inevitable. What do you need from me? He asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since the morning incident. We need you to support this publicly. Stand with us. Show your officers that this isn't about us versus them. It's about all of us working together for something better. A knock at the door interrupted them. The governor's assistant entered with a tablet showing social media updates. The morning's videos have been viewed millions of times. #Justice for Marcus was trending nationwide. Chief, Marcus said, pointing to the tablet, we can fight this wave, or we can ride it toward real change. Your choice. Chief Hendricks stood up straighter, his decision made. I'll support the reform bill, but I want to be involved in shaping it. My officers need to know their concerns matter too. That's exactly what we want, Governor Mitchell said, extending her hand. Partnership, not punishment. Marcus looked out the window at the gathering media crews. Let's show them something they don't expect. Instead of another story about conflict between police and citizens, let's show them a story about working together for change. The chief nodded slowly. What about Officer Cooper? He'll be suspended with pay, Marcus said firmly. But more importantly, he'll be the first to go through the new training program. His experience can help other officers understand why these changes matter. As they prepared for the press conference, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His mother had always told him that real change doesn't come from fighting fire with fire, but from turning sparks of conflict into lights of understanding. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Capitol steps as Marcus, Governor Mitchell, and Chief Hendricks walked out together to face the media. They were about to show the world that sometimes the best response to discrimination isn't rage, but reform. 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus sat in a small conference room at the police training center. The room had plain white walls, a simple table, and 2 chairs. A box of tissues sat untouched in the center of the table. Through the window, you could see police recruits doing their morning exercises. The door opened slowly, and Officer James Cooper walked in. He looked different in civilian clothes, younger, somehow, and less sure of himself. His face had gotten thinner over the past 2 weeks, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Mr. Richardson, Cooper said quietly, standing awkwardly by the door. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Marcus gestured to the empty chair. Please, sit down, Officer Cooper. His voice was professional but not unkind. The viral videos of their encounter had now been viewed over 20 million times, and both men knew their meeting today would be just as important as their first encounter. Cooper sat down, his hands fidgeting with a small notebook he brought. Sir, he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. These past 2 weeks have been difficult. I imagine they have, Marcus replied, noting how Cooper couldn't quite meet his eyes. Your suspension ends next week, correct? Cooper nodded. Yes, sir, but that's not why I asked for this meeting. He finally looked up, his face showing raw emotion. My daughter saw the videos at school. She's 12. She came home crying, asking if her daddy really hated black people. Marcus leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of Cooper's words fill the room. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance. What did you tell her? Marcus asked softly. Cooper's eyes became wet. I told her the truth, that I made assumptions about you based on how you looked, that I treated you differently because of your race. His voice cracked slightly. She asked me why, and I couldn't give her a good answer. Marcus pulled a photograph from his briefcase and placed it on the table. It showed a young black boy standing proudly in front of a school building. That's me at 12, he said, the same age as your daughter. That day, a police officer stopped me on my way home from school. Asked me where I got my new backpack, assumed I must have stolen it. Cooper stared at the photo, his face showing understanding for the first time. Officer Cooper, Marcus continued, that incident stayed with me. Just like what happened 2 weeks ago will stay with your daughter. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Cooper straightened in his chair. I've been thinking about that, sir. I want to be part of the solution. I've been reading about bias training, talking to black officers on the force. He pulled out his notebook. I've written down every thought, every assumption that went through my head that morning. Things I never even realized I was thinking. Marcus nodded encouragingly. That's a good start. Self-awareness is the first step toward change. Would you? Cooper hesitated, then continued. Would you be willing to share your experiences with other officers? Help us understand what it feels like from your perspective. A small smile appeared on Marcus's face. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd ask. He pulled out a folder labeled Police Community Dialogue Program. The governor and Chief Hendricks have approved a new training initiative. We want officers to hear real stories, understand real experiences. Cooper's eyes lit up with interest. And you want me to be part of it? Yes, Marcus said firmly. Your story, our story, can help other officers recognize their own biases. Sometimes the best teachers are those who've learned the hardest lessons. Tears formed in Cooper's eyes. I want to make this right, not just for my daughter, but for every person I've ever stopped without just cause. Marcus reached across the table and handed Cooper a tissue. That's why I agreed to this meeting, because change doesn't happen through punishment alone. It happens through understanding. As they continued talking, the afternoon sun cast both their shadows on the wall behind them, two men, once divided by prejudice, now united in purpose. Outside the window, a new group of police recruits gathered for training, unknowing that their future lessons would be shaped by what was happening in this small conference room. The box of tissues remained mostly untouched, but the notebook in Cooper's hands filled with ideas, plans, and promises for a better future in law enforcement. 6 months after the viral incident, the State Police Academy's main auditorium was packed with new recruits, veteran officers, and community leaders. The morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the stage where Marcus Richardson and Officer James Cooper stood side by side. And that's how one morning changed not just our lives, Marcus said into the microphone, but the entire approach to policing in our state. He looked different now, more relaxed, yet somehow more powerful. His story had made him a national figure in police reform. Officer Cooper, back in his uniform with a new pin identifying him as a community relations trainer, stepped forward. 6 months ago, I stopped a man because of the color of his skin, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Today, I teach other officers how to recognize and overcome their own biases. The audience listened intently. Among them sat Cooper's daughter, now 13, beaming with pride. Next to her was Governor Mitchell, who had pushed through the police reform bill in record time. The changes they had implemented were already showing remarkable results. Marcus clicked to the next slide in their presentation, showing statistics. Traffic stops down by 40%. Civilian complaints reduced by 60%. Community trust ratings up by 45%. Over 1,000 officers completed new bias training. 8 other states adopting similar programs. These numbers tell a story, Marcus explained, pointing to the screen. But the real change isn't in statistics. It's in the daily interactions between officers and citizens. Cooper nodded in agreement. Last week, I watched one of our graduates handle a situation that 6 months ago might have gone very differently. Instead of confrontation, there was conversation. Instead of suspicion, there was understanding. The chief of police stood up from his seat in the front row. Officer Cooper, Mr. Richardson, would you share with our guests the new protocol you two developed? Marcus smiled and pulled out a laminated card. Now standard issue for all officers in the state. We call it the Think Twice Protocol, he said, holding it up. Before making any stop, officers ask themselves 2 questions. Why am I really stopping this person? And would I stop them if they look different? Cooper added, it's simple, but it makes us pause and check our assumptions. That small pause can make all the difference. In the audience, news cameras rolled. This program had become a model for police departments across the country. The viral video that had once shown their worst moment was now being used as a teaching tool in police academies nationwide. Mrs. Thompson, Marcus's elderly neighbor who had witnessed the original incident, sat in the audience wiping tears from her eyes. She had become an active member of the Civilian Oversight Committee, bringing her perspective as a longtime community resident. The hardest part of change, Marcus continued, is admitting that we need to change. Officer Cooper showed tremendous courage in not just accepting his mistake, but working to help others learn from it. Cooper's face reddened slightly at the praise. Mr. Richardson showed even greater courage. He responded. He turned what could have been my career-ending mistake into an opportunity for growth, not just for me, but for our entire department. Governor Mitchell stood and joined them on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, what these two men have created goes beyond police reform. They've shown us how to turn a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Among them were officers from other states, community activists, and even a few celebrities who had helped fund the new training programs. As the applause died down, Marcus and Cooper shared a knowing look. The morning that had started with prejudice and hostility had led to something neither of them could have imagined. A genuine friendship built on understanding and a shared commitment to change. Outside the auditorium, the city went about its daily business. But inside patrol cars, inside precinct houses, and inside the minds of officers on the beat, things were different now. Each traffic stop, each interaction, each moment carried the possibility of either reinforcing old prejudices or building new bridges. Marcus's mother's photo sat on his desk at the Capitol, her smile seeming to approve of how her son had handled adversity. Next to it stood a new frame, a picture of Marcus and Cooper speaking to a group of young officers, showing the next generation that change was possible, one conscious decision at a time. The story of a confrontation on a sunny morning had become a lesson in transformation, proving that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes.